for some kind of monthly series where we can share what's already been done, as well as share in the back half of the year, really share what is going to be happening with these 6 stations that are going to be testing in the next couple months. You go to the next slide, Lindsay. So here's a breakdown of what the, here's a breakdown of what the webinar series is going to look like. So we're going to do a different topic every month. It is always going to be about revenue generation and experimenting with new ways of generating revenue. And what we want to emphasize in each of these is detailed case studies. So part of our mission is to rise up all ships. So we're going to share and ask all of our speakers to share real numbers, real results, and what did and didn't work. And we're going to be emphasizing open, honest transparency because we figure all local media organizations can benefit from sharing more. It's always going to be the 4th Tuesday of every month. The slides are going to be shared afterwards through our mailing list. The next one is going to be about Kickstarter campaigns, and we're going to be asking KPCC, WDET, and WAMU to all share their success stories around using Kickstarter. I want to give a shout out to our Twitter handle. You should follow us on Twitter. And with that, I want to hand it now over to Lindsay to really kick off this first webinar. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Joan. Can you guys hear me? I unmuted myself. Okay. Hi, I'm Lindsay Goldberg. I am the program manager at the BizLab. And I'm just going to go over a couple of logistic things really quickly about how this is going to work. But first, I want to thank all of you guys for being here. There are currently 31 people in this webinar, which is super exciting. And I'm going to explain a little bit about how this works. And this word cloud that I've put together here just shows a couple of the locations that people are joining us from. So I believe we have representatives from 18 states. And I didn't count all of the different organizations individually, but there are a bunch of different ones, including a bunch of different, we have a couple of community radio stations, quite a few public radio stations, including the 6 stations in our cohort that we're working with over the next year. We have representatives from a bunch of different places. Yeah, I don't need to go through all of them specifically, but we're super appreciative that all of you are here, and we're very excited to start. So this is a Zoom meeting, as you know by now, and everyone is muted by default on entry, and you can't unmute yourself just because causes a lot of audio problems, and we'd like you to be able to hear our presenters. So if you have a question for the presenters, we ask you to use the chat window, which if you can't find it, hopefully you should see a notification on the bottom by now. Do you see it, Ted? I just want to make sure. Okay, all right, great. So if you have a question, I will be moderating the questions for the presenters. So I'll have that window open and I will ask them and unmute myself because I'm running the meeting. So if you have a question, just throw it in the chat box down below and we will get to them as they come in. And today's topic is podcast donations. So we're going to hear from Ted Fuller, who is our business technology and analytics lead here at WBUR. And we will also hear from Rebecca Lavoie, who is the digital director. I thought you were the, yes, digital producer and director at New Hampshire Public Radio. And she will be talking about Brook. So now I'm going to hand it over to Ted.
Thanks. Let's see. So, hey everybody, thanks for attending. My name is Ted Fuller, and I'm the business technology and analytics lead for the BizLab. I'll be describing some revenue experiments we conducted with 2 podcasts at the end of 2018. And next slide, Lindsay. Next slide. With an objective of raising money through podcasts, we identified some challenges as well as some key questions we'd like to answer so that we can optimize our appeal strategy. The first challenge we identify is that these podcasts are an on-demand experience. So there's no real captive audience that we can rely on, something that pledged radio drives really do rely on. You know, anytime if they don't like our pitch, they can fast forward through it. So that's a big challenge. Next slide, please, Lindsay. A second big challenge we identify is that we've never asked for podcasts before here at WBUR. So that raises the question is, you know, how should we communicate this in the pre-roll or the mid-roll, and what should the style of that request be? Also, what premiums are attracted to these audiences? Something we haven't really experimented with before, so we'll look to answer those during these experiments. A third challenge we identified is that our donation form or podcast listing is a mobile experience, but our donation form is really not ideal for mobile users. You can see an example of it to the right. So one of the questions that was most interesting to me is that when we improve that form experience, will we get more of the people who try to donate following through and finish up donating? And next slide, please, Lindsay. So I'm going to describe both experiments, and then afterwards we'll cover the results of both of them together. First experiment we ran was a Circle Round podcast. Now this is a storytelling podcast aimed at children and families. For this first experiment, we offered a premium of a Circle Round coloring book, which you can see displayed right there, in return for a donation of $5 a month or $60 for the year. The coloring book is really cool. It tied into episodes so kids could color along while listening. However, this value was not effectively demonstrated by our mobile donation page. You can see there's no real way to view the coloring book at this point in the process. Also in this experiment, I should note we placed the call to action in the mid-roll, and we can play an example of that if you would, Lindsay. And I'll want the Circle Round coloring book one down there.
Oh, hi. Thank you so much for babysitting.
No problem, but BT Dubs, you left your enormous leaving my child with my sister bag behind.
Oh, sorry.
Don't be. I'm eating your goldfish crackers and I'm coloring right now.
Not surprised.
It's very relaxing. I love this book. Are these pictures from folk stories that I'm coloring?
Oh, yeah. It goes with their favorite podcast, Circle Round. Each episode is a different story.
Yeah, that makes more sense because I couldn't figure out how the pictures related. I was like, I don't think that dragon from before is going to fit in the hut.
Well, have fun. And when you get a chance, can you bring back that bag?
All right, I'll do it. But I'm definitely keeping the coloring book because I'm almost finished it. And the crackers, obviously.
Obviously.
Oh, fruit snacks.
WBUR Circle Round is listener supported. Kick in $5 or $10 a month, and when you do, pick up your own Circle Round coloring book while supplies last. Find more info online at wbur.org/color.
Thanks, Lindsay. Back one slide. There we are. Excellent. So that one was placed in the mid-roll, and let's see. And it was read by, as you can tell, it was read by our creative mid-roll team. So different from a typical mid-roll or audience request that you might experience where typically the host is reading it. Next slide, please, Lindsay. The second experiment we ran was with a podcast called Endless Thread. This podcast explores stories found in Reddit threads and interviews, the people involved, as well as experts on the subject. I gotta say, I'm a big fan of this one myself. I like that each episode is going to be covering a whole new topic, so you're never going to get bored by the topics. For this one, we offered a customized 6-second song recorded by the hosts in return for a $10 donation. The reason we went as low as $10 is that we wanted to make this an impulse purchase and get a larger portion of the audience involved. Also in this experiment, in contrast to the first experiment, we placed the call to action in the pre-roll, and it was read by the hosts. So Lindsay, if you'd activate that audio experience one more time. This one is going to be, I'll point it out, it's the number one, Endless Thread.
All right, clearly you're an Endless Thread listener.
So now we're asking you to consider supporting Endless Thread.
Consider it. How do you support us? By making a $10 donation to WBUR, the station where Endless Thread makes our show every week for you.
Tell WBUR you want Endless Thread to continue by throwing us a digital Alexander Hamilton. That's our ask. $10 for everything we make.
Just text the word THREAD to the number 20222.
And to our international listeners, you can still donate at wbur.org/thread.
Now, here's where things get interesting, though. When you text us, we are going to text you back with a link to a super important listener survey.
And if you fill out that survey, Ben and I are going to write you your very own 6-second song.
Seriously, we will write it about your boyfriend, your corgi, about your favorite pizza. It's up to you.
Be part of our weird singing experiment. Text the word THREAD to the number 20222 or go to wbur.org/thread.
Thanks, Lindsay. And back up just one. So definitely one of the fun parts of that experiment was just reading all the suggestions people had for their 6-second songs. Another thing that was different about this experiment was that we relied, instead of only relying on the web donation form that you saw in the previous experiment, we used a text to donate platform, which you can see demonstrated right there. So a user would text the word thread to this number, 20222, and they'd receive a reply, which they'd have to confirm. As you can see, I'm on a family plan and it wouldn't work for me. Let's see. So successful donors, though, were routed to a form collecting their information for the custom song. Now, as we approached the end of the campaign, we updated the pre-roll because we had some 6-second songs recorded, and we wanted to emphasize the fact that this opportunity is running out of time. So if you want to get on board now. And I'd be happy to share those audio with you. But in the interest of time, I think we'll go on to the next.
Somebody
slide.
actually just asked to hear a 6-second
Then
song.
let's go ahead and do it. I think that's critical mass.
Let's go back in here.
I think number 3 is a good choice.
Okay.
There we go. Thanks, Lindsay.
Ben, how are you spending your holidays?
Pretty sure the same way you are, Amory, recording hundreds of 6-second songs for listeners who've donated $10 to Endless Thread's home station, WBUR, to keep the show coming correct in 2019.
Thank you to everyone who's pitched in so far. And if you haven't yet, you only have until the end of December.
So do it now, because we love making up songs about you. Here's how it works. Join the Endless Thread community by texting the word thread to the number 20222 or give at wbur.org/thread.
And when you do, we'll send you a link to a super short listener survey. Just fill that out, tell us what you want us to sing about, and we'll write you your very own 6-second song.
Want it to be about your corgi? Gumbo! He's the world's most photogenic corgi. Take his picture.
Or maybe you want to use your song to share some big life news.
Guess what, Ed? Guess what, Ed? Your wife Lucy is pregnant. Love Endless Thread.
Congratulations! Congratulations!
You do the texting, we'll do the singing.
Remember, it's the word thread to the number 20222 or give at wbur.org/thread.
Only until December 31st. Happy holidays.
Thanks, Lindsay.
All right. So actually, we have a question that says, do you know how many donations failed versus succeeded? And did you have a way to direct those failed pledges to a different donation platform? Which is good because we are just about to get to that. Oh, no, that's not what I meant to click on.
Thanks, Lindsay. Yeah, so I'm glad you asked that question because that's just what this next slide is about. So let's see. Though both podcasts attracted a similar number of attempted contributors, the Endless Thread experiment yielded many more successful ones. 452 people visited the Circle Round Coloring Book donation page, but only 52 donations came in. So that's just 11.5%. With Endless Thread, 471 people attempted to donate, and 233 of those were successful. That's almost 50%. Now, I want to touch on the question right there that he asked will be addressed in the next slide, lessons learned. But I wanted to point out, there wasn't wild success when it came to dollars raised with this, with either of these. But I wanted to emphasize that wasn't our goal with these experiments. We were using these, instead of looking to maximize revenue with these experiments, our goal was learning the right strategy and tools for future attempts with even larger audiences. So you can see that, our overall strategy with the Circle Round podcast led to about 0.02% of the total audience donating. And Endless Thread, we got a little bit higher. And I attribute that to the fact that we had two different avenues to the donation. If somebody failed their text donation, they got a response with our traditional form like you saw on the Circle Round page. So there was an alternative to answer that question. Next slide, please, Lindsay. So the first lesson we learned, which addresses that question, text to donate failed 55% of the time. So we need a better solution for mobile donations. Now, to dig into that on what Robert was asking.
He was asking percentage of new donors to WBUR that came through these campaigns versus people who are already WBUR donors.
Okay, I was looking at the first question he had. Well, I'll get back to, I think some of these questions I'll probably have to circle back around to understand.
Finish what you were saying, and then we'll get to questions after that.
Come back to the questions.
Yes.
So, the first lesson that we learned is that text to donate alone is not sufficient. Too many attempted donors failed. 13% of these were from technical failure, like you saw with me, where I was on my family plan. 42% of people from the lack of follow-up from user. They never texted yes to confirm. So what that tells me is that, we need, for one thing, we need a solution that doesn't allow 13% of the users, to just have a technical failure. And also that maybe a solution where there's never an opportunity for the user to look away. Once the user texts yes, if the user's not paying close attention, they could think they're done. And then maybe not follow up, which I think is what we're seeing there from that 42%. Another lesson learned is that we should have asked for $20 instead of $10. We didn't see the huge uptick that we thought might happen when we reduced the donation to the level of an impulse purchase. Furthermore, donors who chose other than $10 gravitated towards the $20 level. So we could have doubled the amount of $20 without losing a significant number of donors. Finally, urgency in the messaging seems to work. It's a good idea to change up the audio week by week and consistently emphasize the deadline. Next slide, please, Lindsay.
Really quickly, I want to touch on Toby's question because he asked, with the text to donate tool, how were gifts processed and were you able to collect donor information?
So with the text to donate tool, we are not able to use the information they provide us in terms of the phone numbers to contact those people. So we managed to get around that by routing them to a Google form afterwards where we could collect that information in a manner where we could contact them from it. But if you're relying only on this text to donate platform, it's kind of a dead end because you get money from these people, but then you can never contact them again.
So then tying that into Robert's question, which we'll just do this one in the interest of time, do we not know the percentage of age of new donors to WBUR that came through the text to donate campaign because of that?
That's correct.
Okay.
We have the numbers, so we could probably do some matching to understand whether they're new donors, but we cannot contact those people with the information provided by the text to donate platform.
Okay. And then Maddie's question about the huge gap between attempted and successful for Circle Round, you kind of touched on already, so we can.
Yes, I believe that was likely due to the poor mobile experience for for our fundraising page. If you go back just a few slides, Lindsay, let's see. Here we are. So that was the mobile experience, and I think I'll show you what I'm working on next. But I think this is a better experience than that, and then this is the better mobile experience, the one that I'm really excited about, where users can use Apple Pay. So I got ahead of myself. These are the vendors we used. If you're interested in how they performed or which ones correspond to which experiments, I'd be happy to answer any emails directly about that. In our next experiment, next slide, please, Lindsay. We're using a new giving platform that may be initiated by text, but which uses an optimized web form to process the donation. This includes the ability for the listener to submit their donation using Apple or Google Pay. In return for a donation, we're raffling two-week sessions at a New England summer camp. Now, I'll admit on my own part, I was not yet set up with Apple Pay when I began this, but I think it puts us ahead of the curve where, I think in the future we can expect more people to have these payment processing platforms set up on their phone. And candidly, so far, we haven't gotten a whole lot of traction on this. It's also used a mid-roll, like our initial Circle Round revenue experiment, but has definitely experienced a lot less traction. We're still not certain why that is, but we are getting people visiting the pages, but definitely to a lower extent than I believe we were seeing for the initial Circle Round. So more to come on this one.
And when does this contest end?
This one ends on March 14th.
Okay, so it's ongoing in the Circle Round podcast.
That's right.
Correct, okay. So are there any other questions for Ted in the experiments that WBUR has been doing? And Joan has said.
Joan, thanks for mentioning that. That's a very good point. I forgot to mention that from the portion where it showed the. Oh yes, Joan had a good point that people likely wanted to see the coloring book before giving, and there's nothing to see with the song.
Is that it?
That's it.
Okay, all right, awesome. So at this point, if there are no more questions for Ted, which it doesn't look like there are. Oh. Rodney is asking, was this your first attempt to use text to give, or had you tried it on air before here at WBUR?
I don't believe the opportunity to text to donate has ever been announced on air, but it does live within our WBUR Listen app. So if somebody presses the heart button, they're routed to a text to donate experience through there.
Is it using the same tool?
It is.
And that is, so Sarah asked if it was using the same tool, just for those who couldn't hear, and Ted said yes. Do we know our success rate with text to give or what the percentage is?
Can you back up a couple slides? One more. So text to donate failed 55% of the time. And 13% of that was from technical failure, and 42% of that was from the user not confirming their donation.
Is that at WBUR generally? Is the failure rate high? Do we know?
That is the failure rate I would expect in general.
Okay. All right. And then, so Melanie has asked, will you remove the offer from the podcast after the 14th? Since people can listen in the months or weeks to come. Is that easy to do? That's a really good question.
With dynamic insertion, there's no way to remove it from people who've already downloaded it that I know of.
Okay.
But we will stop doing the dynamic insertion once the sweepstakes is ended.
Okay. Robert has asked, we use text to give on podcasts at WNYC, but we use it to send the listener a link to a pledge form to complete their gift, which is a different, nice way of doing things as well. Awesome.
That's similar to how we're operating with Give Lively, this next experiment.
Great. So hopefully we will have some similar results to WNYC. At this point, I'm going to hand it over to Rebecca Lavoie, who's going to talk about New Hampshire Public Radio's podcast, Brook. It's just loading here. And I will unmute her in just a second, as soon as I get this to load. 1 second, sorry. Take it away, Rebecca.
Hello. So I'm Rebecca Lavoie. I'm the digital director at NHPR. And also on this slide, as I point out, I have another foot very solidly in the non-nonprofit podcast production side of our world. I have a podcast production company called Partners in Crime Media. I produce a show called Crime Writers On. I'm a Slate podcaster. I'm a co-host on a Slate podcast about parenting called Mom and Dad Are Fighting. I am the audio production lead for a podcast called Undisclosed. And I also, along with my husband as part of our network, produce a show called These Are Their Stories, the Law and Order podcast. Now, I'm not telling you that so I can get all your downloads, but because that very much informed my experience outside public radio, very much informed the experiment that I'm going to be talking about. So would you mind switching to the next slide? Sorry, it's down at the bottom, that 1 through 7 thing. There you go. Okay, so this is how we're thinking about this at NHPR. We do have a cross-departmental team that includes me, our director of content innovation, our director of underwriting, our VP of development, on a cross-departmental team sort of looking at different ways we can be monetizing podcasts now and going forward. And we're thinking about these as a diversified set of buckets. So you'll see the 5 buckets there now that we're actively talking about. And you'll see that can include ad agency sales, national ads, local ad sales, grant funding. We've had some success with that. A network subscription, which I think is not dissimilar to maybe what we just heard about at BUR, where you're sending somebody to your networks page using NHPR as the brand. And I think about that like a Slate Plus, like a Stitcher Premium, where you're supporting a slate of shows. And then also show-specific podcast gifts, which can be ongoing or one time. And I think of that as the Patreon model, where somebody is super loyal to one show and they're willing to give something to that one show in order to get something in return, or just because they really want to support it. Potential buckets include things like sponsorships, events, sales for IP, for acquisitions for film, movies, television, that kind of thing. That's kind of down the road, but those are some of the future things we're talking about. And I do want to mention just quickly, I'm not a graphic designer. I created this presentation on Infogram, and it's text heavy, and I promise I'm not going to read all the text, but I really wanted to create something that you guys could take away as notes. So you'll see some more text on the upcoming slides. So go ahead and hit next. So earlier last summer in 2018, we did an experiment with 2 of our popular podcasts that we created at NHPR outside in. which is a show about the environment. It's a narrative show that looks at stories kind of around the outdoors. It's not specifically an environmental show, but that's sort of the editorial lens. Longtime host Sam Evans-Brown has a very tight relationship with this extremely loyal audience. And we also did it on a show called Civics 101, which has a bigger audience, but at the time had just had seen an editorial shift with 2 brand new hosts and a complete change in format and a new editorial sensibility. So this experiment was very much using the Fund Drive public radio best practice model. It used a Fund Drive public radio form created in Luminate, and the shows each made specific show-oriented messages in their voice with their sensibility, asking listeners to contribute. Now, if you just look at the top line data here, you'll see the Outside In fundraiser was much more successful. And I would more than guess that it was because of the relationship that Sam has with listeners. The show is all about engagement. It's kind of built that way. And if you just want to hit the audio button here, you'll hear that the ask that Sam did was very character driven, which is very much the sound of the show. Is the audio not firing? I can describe it.
Orders, hosts, editors. And then there's the other stuff. I actually don't even really know what everybody else does. We don't talk to them. We don't make eye contact in the hallways. We often don't even know their names. But this guy, he's hard to ignore.
Sure. I'm Zach Lawson. I'm the new Chief Operating Officer here at New Hampshire Public Radio.
Zach came to us from, I don't know, like the IRS or something. He's probably an accountant, I guess. Again, not sure about him in any way, but I do know this. He's the guy at the station who controls all the money. Fan of public radio, generally?
I listen to public radio all the time when I'm in my car, when I'm at home with my kids. Yeah, absolutely.
Do you listen to Outside In?
Occasionally when it's broadcast over NHPR, but otherwise, no. I mostly listen to audiobooks on CD in my car.
This, of course, is trouble. So not really like a podcast person.
No, definitely not.
Zach, new guy, heard about the Powerline series that we did last year. Very ambitious project, got lots of new listeners, but is unimpressed.
And I was floored at how much money it must have cost to send you guys all the way up into that exotic location in northern Canada. I mean, must have been like a vacation for you guys, probably.
Well, I mean, we won some journalism awards.
I heard about that, but again, I don't really follow podcasting, so I'm not really sure what the awards are out in that space.
Okay, do you want to hit stop on that audio?
Outside.
So that is like a 3-minute spot. It kind of goes on as a little bit of a story arc where Zach is our villain. Sam is trying to convince him in the narrative of the ask that podcasts matter. And at the end, it is a very compelling ask. He asks for $10 and says, show the man, stick it to the man, show him that podcasts matter and that you are willing to pay for them. So we routed people through a link in the show notes and a link on the Outside In radio, on the Outside In webpage, to a Luminate Fund Drive form. We asked for the $10 gift, but we created other options for gifts. And we found that the average gift ended up being about, again, that magic number, $20. We also found that putting the link right in the show notes was a good strategy. About 35% of gifts were originated right from the show notes, and then 65% went to the website or clicked on a link in our Outside In newsletter. Want to go ahead and go to the next slide? So the Brook Experiment, we kind of ran in a little bit of a siloed team, not involving our development team, not because specifically we didn't want to, but because we were kind of building it in conjunction with the production of the show. And coincidentally, our fall fund drive was happening at the same time the Brook podcast launched. We also had the opportunity, our new COO, Zach, who you heard as the villain in the other spot, really wanted to experiment in some way at the station with PayPal, which I did as well, because you may think of PayPal as the thing that you use to pay for things on eBay, but PayPal is actually the most common transactional way for paying things on the web. 265 million accounts on PayPal in 2018 with a 17% year after year growth. And the advantage of PayPal is that you actually don't have to have an account to process a transaction with it. It's just a credit card processing tool, just like any other payment platform. And it does collect a little bit of data, specifically email data, which is something that we wanted. So the tactics of the Brook series really depended on understanding and knowing what Brook was. Brook is a serialized true crime story with a lot of forensic detail about a cold case. We knew it was going to be very compelling. Coming from the true crime genre myself, I had a deep understanding of the way that those audiences engage with content and kind of what they want and like what's specific. They're the kinds of things they're used to being asked for. So what we built based on some of that understanding was a campaign built around one-time $20 gifts linked for directly from the show notes to the Brook website, and then the donate button was right there, and that brought them to the PayPal form. What they would then get in exchange for their gift during the production of the original 6 episodes of Brook was immediate access to the following week's episode with no ads. We knew there was a great cliffhanger at the end of every episode of Brook, so we knew that saying that's what you can get the next part of the story now would be a compelling ask. And some of the things that informed our thinking, you'll look at my list there. What would Serial do was on the list. Serial did the $20 one-time ask in their first season about mid-season, and they did it in a very straightforward way, being very transparent, saying, we want to make more of this. Please help us do it. If you want us to, give us $20. They didn't wrap it in a bunch of value of public media, value of nonprofit journalism. It was just, if you want more of this, give us $20. So we decided to follow along that model. And another key ingredient here for Brook was that one thing that I know from my for-profit podcast work is the importance of the comfort, engagement, and engagement with the hosts of the show. The idea that you would ask a show production team to deliver an episode a week early without looping them into that decision is ridiculous, because they're the ones who have to make it and have it ready. And then also you have to ask a team of journalists, what are you comfortable with? Are you comfortable with a campaign like this? Are you a podcast listener? Have you listened to podcasts that do this kind of thing, and what do they do? And really get that feedback. So the first ask happened at the end of episode 1 of Brook, and we can just play that for you now. There's a play button there on the right.
To support this podcast, donate $20 at bearbrookpodcast.org. That'll help us make more podcasts like Brook. In return, we'll give you access to each episode a week early, ad-free. Episode 2 is available now. All you've got to do is go to bearbrookpodcast.org or click on the link in the show notes and donate $20. Thanks.
That's
Brook
it.
is reported
So that was before the credits. You can see the credits about to roll there. Quick ask done by Jason, the host, who had just brought listeners through the first chapter of the story. And it was really important to me, and I really impressed upon the production team, say that it's available now. Say that it's already there. Don't talk about how you'll get it every week, a week early. Say you'll be able to listen to the next one now, because we knew the nature of the show would inspire that kind of giving. One thing that I do want to mention that I forgot to mention was that our goal in starting this was to focus during this experiment on what we were learning and make changes as we went, and then document those changes in order to help us build a future process for this kind of ask. That was literally the goal, was let's build something that works and let's figure out how to build it right the next time. We didn't have a money goal associated with this. We hoped to raise maybe $10,000 because of an unrelated reason, but that was kind of what we were thinking, was that we wanted to do was really learn. So you want to go ahead and click the next slide?
Rebecca, do you mind taking a question?
Not at all.
So we have, Deanna has asked, was this a series with a finite end, or did it continue after one season?
So this is a series, it was designed to be a series with a finite end. Coda, there's a break in the Brook case that we are going to be reporting on. We did release 2 update episodes. We heard from the son of the serial killer that was identified in the Brook podcast, and we released an update episode with him. And we released another update episode about a legal development. But there is actually a big break coming in the case that's directly tied to somebody who listened to our podcast. So we are going to be producing 2 more episodes. But it is a series that is going to have an end, and we knew it was going to be a standalone. There might be future seasons that focus on something different. That's yet to be determined, but that was the nature of this. It was sort of an S-Town style one-time series with a finite end, but it's true and it's reported. So here's the top line data from the BizLab experiment. What we decided to do during the experiment was continue it after the show was over and just change the ask, make it more like a tip, make it more like a show us you appreciate this experiment, this kind of in-depth reporting podcast. If you want us to make more of this kind of stuff, go to bearbrook.com and give us $20. So this is an ongoing revenue generator for us. We're still getting donations, and we have no plan to take away that digital insert at this point. We know that discovery of true crime shows in particular lasts far longer than the run of the show. So we decided to keep it up there. One of the things that we're getting from these donations also, of course, is email addresses. We do have a MailChimp associated with this. We have a website associated with it. And we know that we can then draw on that audience as we launch future projects and market to them, and then perhaps do different kinds of asks later and sort of have that be the base of our podcast subscriber audience. So if you look here at the top line numbers, through February 8th, we've raised over $34,000. I did run the gifts per downloads conversion rate that WBUR looked at, but because of the performance and the way that podcasts are rolled out, I was really interested in sort of looking at a dollars per download way of looking at these metrics, because the way that the for-profit podcast business model runs is CPM based, ad based. You are putting dollar targets on things related to audience size. So that was a metric I decided to track as an experiment as well. We did see about a little over 9% by number of gifts from existing NHPR sustaining members and donors. The vast majority of gifts, other than that 9%, were from out of state. But the one thing to keep in mind is that this case, the Brook case, was of high interest inside our state. So even though the vast majority of our listeners are from other states, interest was high in New Hampshire, as small as it is, because we marketed the show heavily on our air. Jason was a guest on our daily talk show. We ran a couple of radio features about it. We really wanted people in our air audience to know about the podcast in a way we don't necessarily do with some of our other podcasts, because it's reported out of our newsroom a story of local interest. So that's the top line numbers. If you want to go ahead to the next slide. So this is that conversion rate I'm talking about. So if you look at the two charts, because this was a series and we were promising the next episode now, one of the things we wanted to track was at what point in the series did gifts start to drop off, or did dollars start to drop off? The bottom line is we continue to collect gifts throughout the whole series with that next episode promise. We did end the next episode promise at the end of part 5, I think. Part 5 was actually a 2-part episode. And then we just switched to the journalism ask. And as you can see, there was a big spike in episode 4 there on both sides, because at the end of episode 4, there was an awesome cliffhanger. So we really wanted to make sure that that ask was clear in episode 4. We put it at the beginning of the episode. We put the first ask at the end of episode 1. We put subsequent ask as a pre-roll at the beginning, and then we digitally inserted something at the end. We wanted to make sure at the end of episode 4, people knew, reminder, you can listen to episode 5 right now. At the end of episode 4, I believe there's a line something like, and we know the identity of the serial killer, which of course we knew would spur people to want to know the identity of the serial killer. So if you just want to quickly play the very short ask at the bottom of this page, this is what it sounds like now. People just discovering the BizLab podcast now, this is what they're hearing.
BizLab has been something of an experiment in storytelling for me. And greenlighting this project was something of a risk for the station that allowed me to do it. So if you want to help make the case that podcasts like this one are worth doing, donate $20 at bearbrookpodcast.com. And either way, thanks for listening.
If that sounds familiar to you, that kind of language, it might sound familiar because it's the kind of language we use internally when we're having these conversations about revenue and business around podcasting internally. You know, content people who listen to a lot of podcasts, who feel like they really understand the space, you know, in stations, public radio stations all across the country are trying to convince leadership this is worth doing. This is something that other people are making money on. This is something people are interested. This is not the wave of the future. It's actually happening now. Jason wrote that message. He was like, this seems to work well with what we did before. What do you think? And I don't think we edited a word of it because it's all true and very transparent. And by at this point, if you've listened to several episodes of Bear Brook, you have an intimate relationship with Jason. He's been your guide through the story. So that has continued to bring us gifts. The average gift remains over $20. The download conversion rate has remained steady at 0.03%, and our dollars per download conversion rate has remained steady at about 60. I can't see the graphic there because of the video, but I have a printout here. 0.63%, which means we're continuing to average about 6.3 cents for every download of Bear Brook that we're seeing, even though the podcast is technically no longer in production in its original iteration. Next slide, please. So here's what we're looking at now. We do have these 2 new episodes of Bear Brook coming out, which we know will bring some renewed interest because it is going to be a breaking story that this case has some resolution. Fortunately, I wish I could say more than that, but I can't. We are going to be continuing with PayPal. We found it to be very seamless. We didn't get a single email question or complaint about the use of PayPal. We didn't mention PayPal in the asks. It was just the portal. So when you click the donate button, if you had a PayPal account, it opened your PayPal account. If it didn't, you got the Pay by PayPal credit card fill out form. It was a seamless, easy experience on mobile. Once we had one customer service kink with it, where basically we were sending as the thank you for the payment, we were sending them directly to the access page for the RSS feed for the new episodes of Bear Brook, and a couple people that thank you email went into their junk, and so we had to figure out just like how to deliver the customer service a little bit better around episode 2, and we were able to figure that out. We're going to keep being nimble. We're going to try to improve the user experience for the delivery of the custom RSS feed, and we are in talks with SupportCast, which is the new product being rolled out by Slate, to think about using that in the future for a way to deliver the custom RSS feed to people, because this was not a custom RSS feed. It was just a public RSS feed that was hidden. We knew there was risk that people might share it. We decided to accept that risk as we did this experiment. Most important, I think we are now, because we've used this new bucket with Bear Brook, we are now baking in buckets as we plan and talk about shows that are being developed. For instance, we have one series coming up that, is a very strong possibility of getting some grants, but that we also know could be a series with future seasons. It's going to be a series around medical mysteries, and I do think there's an opportunity in that series to do a similar ask. If you love this, give us this one thing and show us that you want more of it. And then we have another series that's coming out that might lend itself more to a subscription ask, support the podcast. The one thing that we are not doing very much of is thinking about these podcast asks and NHPRs branding. We know that podcast listeners, in reality, even though we care a lot who's making podcasts, we know that the majority of podcast listeners don't care that much about who is making the podcast that they are addicted to. Obviously, there are some very strong network brands out there, Slate, Gimlet. Of course, we have aspirations of NHPR someday being that kind of brand, but we're more interested in capturing the audience who came to us through this piece of content. So every podcast we make as a standalone does have its own website. It, of course, cross promotes and ties back with NHPR, but we want to create a full experience for the listener, and therefore we are asking them to contribute to the show rather than subscribe or donate to our public radio station. That is the way that we're thinking about it right now. So I hit my post. I did 22 minutes. I guess we have time for questions, right?
Yes. So we have a couple of questions, and I'm going to scroll back a little bit. Thank you so much, Rebecca. That was wonderful. So the first question was actually asked by Joan quite a few minutes ago. She said, well, I believe the platforms with mobile and PayPal matter a lot. Do you think it made a difference in having PayPal be the sole platform that you accepted donations for Bear Brook?
I do. I think it made a big difference because it's so easy. I mean, most people, whether or not they know it, have used PayPal dozens, or if not more times, to just do regular transactions on the internet. And one of the mistakes, I'm not sure if it's a mistake, but I feel like it's a mistake. And this is where the 1 foot in for-profit podcasting versus the 1 foot in public radio goes, is that what we're asking for with these kinds of things is a transaction. And I think when we do fund drives, we very much build that around the long-lasting, entrenched relationship. But when people have come to you through one product that you've made, the initial ask really is a transaction. And I think having it look and feel like every other transaction that they've made that day or done that week, I think it's helpful. Nobody came to the PayPal form and then wrote to us and said, I don't know how to use this. I've never seen this before. They either logged in and they just said pay with PayPal and went to their account on their phone and paid with it, or they just put in their email address and credit card number, and that was it. I do think it made a difference. And the data, which I don't have access to all of the back end data, failure rates, all that stuff, I could certainly get that from our COO, but it looked to be a non-factor. And in fact, we know the conversion rate was very high once people went to that link, and there weren't people saying I accidentally paid twice. I meant to, but I didn't. We didn't get any of that.
Wow, interesting. Okay, great. So we have Deanna who asked, how did you deliver a podcast ahead of time to a donor?
So we made sure that the show was ready to, with new episodes, that they were a week ahead in their production schedule. We worked that out with them a couple months in advance and just said, your real deadline for this is a week before. And we also made the agreement with them that if there was breaking news or some change, as long as in week 1, that week 2 episode was already there, that we have sort of the compact with the listener that you'll get it early. And if you need to make a change, if it's going to be a day after a week early, 1 day later than the day of episode 2 launching, episode 3 is going to come out, they would just have to let me know and we could adjust the messaging. It never happened, but it was really a partnership with the team that was making the show. What we did is through our audio host, Megaphone, we created a separate feed called BizLab Extras. We uploaded all the audio there, the same as we did with our regular shows. And we took that RSS and we created a hidden page on the BizLab podcast website that had a player for all of the early episodes, and that also had instructions for how to add the podcast to your podcast player so that they would get it automatically once we uploaded the early episodes.
Thank you. So I'm actually going to skip ahead to Toby's question and then I'll come back to Robert's. But so Toby has asked, who were the team members and what were their roles who helped to execute this giving experience?
Sure. So our COO was huge in helping me set up the back end of it. He did he set up the PayPal business account and allowed me, and I was also an admin on it, so I was able to in real time pull donors so I could pull them down and throw them up in our MailChimp list. So if we wanted to send out, be really nimble about sending out emails to the listeners who had opted in this particular way, we could. So he did that. I set up the webpage and the second RSS feed, and the show team was responsible for recording and inserting the deliverable ads, which they're accustomed to doing because of our other productions. And they were also responsible for just keeping me in the loop on whether or not the next episode was going to be on time or not. But that was it. It was really a nimble team. As a result of it being a nimble team, when we made adjustments along the way, when we decided, for instance, to do the one episode where we had the ask at both the beginning and the end, we didn't have to have a meeting. It was literally, I just walked over and said, you guys cool with doing it this way this week, and here's why. Because we looked at the data, we know this cliffhanger is coming, and we did it that way.
Great. And looks like the last question for now, unless anybody has more, feel free. It looks like we still have a few minutes, but the last one for right now is how many downloads/donations occurred outside the initial series broadcast?
Okay, I actually have that. If you can scroll back. I have that data, and I originally can, if you want to scroll back to the charts, one more. Oh, I'm sorry, the next one. It's the episode by episode one. So here we have on this, so this chart, I'm sorry, I don't know if this chart goes to the February 8th. I have that data. I have it on a spreadsheet. I will send it to you. We've continued to get a very steady stream of, a handful of donations every day for the podcast. I believe off the top of my head, during the original run of the 6 episodes of the $34,000, we raised about $22,000 during the original run. And that up until the February 8th date, we raised like about a $12,000. That's my top line math that I remember. So, in the few weeks after the series, we raised about 50% of the money that we raised during the series. Like again, we decided to not approach this like a fund drive. We decided to not make it like urgency campaign, do it now and get this thing. No premiums, no nothing. It was just support this. Here's why, and here's what you get. And really using the best practices of Slate Plus, the best practices of Serial, the way that I work on my own podcast with Patreon listeners, really building the relationship that way, saying, we know that you love this. We'll tell you how we made it. We'll give you more of it if you give us a tip, basically, is what it comes down to.
Awesome. Do we have any more questions for Rebecca before we wrap up here? Or for Ted, or for me, or for Joan, or anybody at the WBUR BizLab? Are there any plans to re-engage these donors to ask for another gift?
I think that the people who've already, so we have, through the magic of MailChimp segmentation, we have an email list also that we've asked people that they could sign up to get updates in the case and so forth. So we have a nice list of people who've given, and then we have a nice list of people who opted in other ways. We don't have a plan now to ask the people who've given for another gift. I like to think of them as our super users who we can ask for leverage in other ways, ask for other things. So for instance, when we pilot, we have a short run series coming out in a few weeks that I think there's going to be a lot of audience crossover and interest in. I plan to roll it out to those people first, perhaps give them an early listen. I really want to think of them as, you did this for us, and now, pretty much in perpetuity, we're going to do something for you. We do have crossover of people who are members of NHPR and who gave to the podcast, including one existing leadership circle member of NHPR who gave an additional $1,000 gift through the podcast donation link. We do plan on communicating in the future with that subset of donors differently, because they've demonstrated loyalty to NHPR in a different way than I think the podcast listener from California may have. Frankly, as somebody who does this as a business on the side, I don't want to obligate somebody who listened in California to a further financial relationship with us unless there is a reason to do that. So maybe for a future series, they might be part of an email list that gets some kind of ask. I don't know. But I think when it comes to Brook in particular, they've done their due diligence. If there is a season 2, if there's more of it, it will be because of what they've already done. And I plan to communicate that to them. Ingrain the habit. Keep doing this, because then maybe the next time we put out a series and you like that, you'll do it again.
Great, thank you. So just to answer Sheila really quickly, this presentation will be emailed out to all of you. We have all of your email addresses from when you registered for the webinar, and that also puts you onto our newsletter list, which will go out monthly, and probably tomorrow I'll send all of these slides out to you. So yes, you will receive them. And I've been recording this webinar as well, so if you'd like a copy of that file, please let me know.
So I want to chime in and thank Ted and Rebecca so much for this fascinating conversation. So when I was jotting down some of my notes to summarize my takeaways from this, first of all, I really like the point you were making, Rebecca, about podcast donations are not within the frame of a local public radio station, and that we should think of them as separate audiences that may have some overlap, but it's not a local ask, so it's hard to jump between the two. Also, the point about host involvement, I think, makes it a better ask. Mobile first, both of you are doing that. And then there's some different approaches, but do we need premiums? And is holding back the content or giving the content early, basically more of a subscription model, how does that play into all of this? So I hope you all, as I did, found this to be really interesting and informative. Thanks, Toby, for doing a shout out of thank you. I think these are really nice specific examples. I know WNYC and other stations have taken slightly different approaches. We want to hear about them. So I want to wrap up the webinar by saying thanks all for coming. And if you have feedback on the webinar series, or if you have feedback on this particular one, or if you have ideas for topics you would like us to cover next, please reach out to us. You can reach BizLab at WBUR.org is a good generic way to reach out to us, or you could email me directly or Lindsay directly or any of us.
Yes. And sorry. Thank you for dealing with the slight technical hiccups. This is the first time we've done this, so we appreciate your patience very much.
Yeah, so thanks everybody. See you in a month.
Bye. Why? I ended the meeting, right?